Did you know that you could cut felt on a laser? Welcome to this beginner masterclass. Today I'm showing you all the details to make your own SVG to make this amazing barn quilt.
Color outside the lines.
Creating your own SVGs for the laser is so much fun. I've been loving experimenting with felt, as you can see here from a recent project. Today we're going to be making a barn quilt made of felt. I'll start the SVG design process in Illustrator, then I have a segment on how to calculate your curve before creating the final SVG in Illustrator and cutting it out on your laser. For this project, you're going to need 9 different colors of felt, and the felt I'm using is synthetic, and it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. We're going to be using our X-Tool honeycomb panel, and they have magnetic clips that allow you to clip the felt onto the panel. I'll show you that later. We're going to be using Aleene's tacky glue, and I'm going to be upcycling a kitchen door. But I suggest you go to the dollar store and find yourself an artist panel. This is a smaller one here, and this one here is 12 inches, but you can always scale it up or down to suit your needs. Of course, you're going to need a laser cutter, and I'm using the X-Tool P2 CO2 laser here. I've also got an inline fan that's hooked up to it, and I highly suggest that you do get an inline fan because that'll take the odors right out the window. And of course, I just showed you a minute ago the honeycomb panel. So let's move on to Illustrator to draw our SVG, and then we'll come back to cut on the X-Tool P2 CO2 laser. Here we are in Illustrator, and I've pre-drawn my barn quilt pattern, but I want to show you how to do it. So let's get to it. I'm going to hit Shift-O on my keyboard, and I'm going to draw my artboard. And then I'll come up here and I'll input the numbers that represent the width and the height that I want to create. So in this case, it's 10.25 by 11 inches. Now barn quilts are typically square, so go ahead and draw this and then scale it to whatever dimensions your substrate is. I'm going to be putting this on an upcycled door, a kitchen cabinet door to be precise, and I'm going to draw it square, but then I'll adjust it later. So for now, let's just escape. Now I'm going to take my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle. I'll come up to my transform tool here, and I want it to be 3 inches. So I'm also going to draw a 4-inch square, and I can duplicate the 3-inch square. So let's hit Alt-Shift, and I can duplicate that. I'll just move that off to the side. I can duplicate it again using Alt-Shift and come up to Transform, and I'll just make the width 4 inches in this case. Now I want these paths to intersect, so I'm just going to drag it over until I see that they're intersecting here, and I'll do the same with this one. Now select everything, and I'll drag it down onto my canvas here. Throughout this whole process, you're going to notice that we have overlapping lines. I'm going to show you how to fix that later. Now I'm going to create another rectangle, and this one is 4 inches long. So I'll just transform again, and I'll input 4 inches into the height. And again, I'll drag it up until it intersects, and I'm going to hold my Shift key so nothing wanders. Again, Alt and Shift and drag will allow me to move this over, and I'm going to move this down, and again come up to transform, and I want it to be 4 inches. Let's just move that down until we get the intersect. Now I'll just copy this, hitting Alt Shift, and move it down again until it intersects. Now what I want to do is I want to draw in these cross lines here. So I'm going to hit my line segment tool, just click on that, and I'm going to hover until I get my anchor, and I'll drag it down to the other side again until I get my anchor, and then I'll release. I'll do the same thing here, drag it down until I see that anchor, And again, I'll drag my lines here. Make sure you're intersecting. Actually, I think that one was off, so let's just move that.
Hit Control+ on the keyboard if you want to zoom in.
Sometimes it's easier just to zoom in so you can see what you're doing. That looks better. And I'm just noticing that this line is off because I couldn't see it. Got my microphone in the way here. So let's just click on it and move that into place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these lines and I'm going to right click and group them.
Hold down the Shift and Alt as you drag it.
Now I'll drag this away. Then what I want to do is come up to Object, Transform, Reflect, and I'm going to reflect it vertically. Now I'll hold down the Shift key and I'm going to drag this right back onto here until it intersects. As you can see, we've got the foundation starting here. Now what I want to do is create these little triangles. So just drag one of these squares off to the side here. I'll click on my line segment tool. Do the same trick where I'm going to anchor it. Now I'm going to select everything. I'm going to come up here to the Pathfinder, open that up.
If you don't already have the Pathfinder in your toolbar, you can also go up to the top and click on Window and Pathfinder, and that will open the toolbar for you.
And I'm going to click on Divide, and I'll right click on it and ungroup it. What that allows me to do is take this little triangle and I'm going to bring it over, but first of all I'm going to hold down my Shift key and I'll wait until I get my rotate tool here, as you can see in the corner. And that'll end up being there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up.
And now I'll shrink it down so that it's the size that I want it. This first one will take just a little bit of time to get precise, but once you have one, you're just going to copy and paste the rest of them, as you'll see in a moment. Just be sure to hold down your Shift key as you bring in the corner so that it scales proportionately.
Now I can copy and paste it.
The shortcut is Control-C and Control-V on your keyboard.
And I can rotate this again, holding the Shift key so that it's 90 degrees. And I will drag this into place. Again, you want to copy and paste, hold the Shift key, turn it twice, and I will drag this into place. Alt-Shift copies it. Make sure you've got your rotate tool here, hold your Shift key, rotate it twice, and drag it into place. Now, everything looks pretty much complete, but what we want to do is erase some of these lines. Now that I have my drawing here, I want to go ahead and delete some of these segments as delineated by these X's. So what I'm going to do is, let's zoom in, and I'm going to use the scissor tool to click on the intersections, and then I'll use the direct select tool just to highlight that one area, and I'll delete it. So that's one section gone. Now this is our next one here. So again, using the scissor tool,
hold down Control and plus on the keyboard to zoom in.
I'll zoom in and I'll just click on these intersect points here. Hit our direct select tool.
To reverse that, hold down Control and Z on the keyboard.
So we didn't quite cut where we wanted to. Let's highlight the line again. Now you can see I've got both these points highlighted, and I can just hit delete on the keyboard and that'll take it right out.
You may run into some instances where you've highlighted your nodes and deleted a section and it doesn't disappear. So let me show you one example of that and why that happened.
I'll highlight it, making sure that I can see these two nodes, then hit delete. Now it's not gone because I have overlap there.
Go back to the scissor tool, click on the same nodes, and you should be able to delete it, as you'll soon see.
Hit delete again. and there you go, it's gone. So if you find that it doesn't work the first time, it's likely that you've got an overlap there. So I'm going to move on to do the rest of these, and we'll be right back to show you how it's looking before we move on to next steps. Before we can break apart these pieces to cut on the respective colors of felt, you may have noticed that there are some overlapping lines with the components here, and that's not good for laser cutting because when you have overlapping lines, it's going to process that area twice. So in order to find those overlapping lines, we're going to select everything. First of all, you want to make sure that it's ungrouped. So we're going to ungroup it. Then we're going to come over to, let's do the stroke first. We're going to make it a 10-point stroke so it's thicker and we can see the lines. Then we're going to come up here to opacity and we're going to make it about 40%. Now let's zoom in. What you're left with is darker lines, and these areas here are the areas that are overlapping. But you can't just go ahead and delete those because you're going to delete this entire square here. You have to break it apart further. So let's do that. Select everything, then come up to Select, Object, and we're going to select Direction Handles. Now we're going to come up to Edit, and we're going to Cut. That leaves us with all these anchor points, and we're just going to hit the Delete key on our keyboard. Now we're going to come up to Edit, and we're going to Paste in Place. So we've essentially got everything back again, but now we're going to be able to delete these darkened lines. So let's click one of these and delete it. And again, we'll just delete, and we'll continue on in that manner until all of these darkened lines are completely gone, and we end up with the same shade of opacity. Now, of course, if you think an area is dark and you click on it accidentally and delete it, you're just going to do a Control-Z and put it back. So just continue on until all these darkened lines are completely gone. And there, you've now got your completed artwork. So we want to bring back the opacity to 100. And we're going to change the stroke to 1 point. Now we're ready to move on and break apart the pieces. So first, I'm going to group everything together again.
If you want to resize this to a different size, now is the time to do it. You'll be doing that in the Transform panel, as I showed you earlier.
Now I'm going to make this entire thing a compound path. So that's Control-8 on the keyboard. If you look at the upper left-hand corner here, you'll see it's now a compound path. Now for the fun part, we're going to colorize this. So in order to do that, we're going to use our Live Paint tool. The paint bucket is right here. So if you click, it's right under the Shape Builder tool. If you want to take the shortcut, you can use K on your keyboard.
Before I go further, let's open up a color reference.
Now that I have my color reference, I'm going to once again select my artwork. I'm going to hit K on the keyboard to bring up the Live Paint tool here, and I'm going to click. When you hover over, you'll see click to make a live paint group, and that's exactly what you want to do. Now if you move around, you'll see everything is separated out in segments, so we can go ahead and color it now. So I'm going to come over here to the swatch panel, and I'm going to choose my first color, and then you'll hover over the area that you want to color and just click away. Choose another paint color. Let's try the green this time. Now for the white, I like to choose just a light gray here so that I can actually see it on the canvas. If it's white, it's just going to blend right in. You're not going to be able to see your pieces. So just quickly scan to make sure that everything is colorized. Now we can delete our reference work. We no longer need that. Let's select everything. Come up to Object, Expand, click OK. Now come back to Object and Ungroup. Now we're going to click off, and we're going to try to click on the lines here, and we're going to be able to pull them right away. We no longer need those lines, so we can delete those. Now here's a fast and easy trick on how to separate all the like colors. But first of all, we're going to have to select everything again and ungroup it one more time. Now we'll start with the green. We'll come up to Select, same, fill color, and now we'll be able to pull away everything that's green. What you want to do is you want to stack it together neatly, not too close together because we are going to apply some kerf later. I'll stack those better later, but for now, let's do that again. Select, same, fill color, and we can drag those into their own separate group. So now we want to stack things together a little better so that we're not going to be wasting material. So for instance, let's start with the white here. I'm going to start at the bottom, and then I'm going to rotate this piece. I'm going to hold the Shift key.
To rotate, you just have to hover over a corner until you see a circular arrow. Then you'll be able to rotate it with your mouse.
Now I can stack it in closer together. Again, I'll hold the Shift key and stack it in. So there you go. I'm going to go ahead and do the same with the rest of these colors, stack them in closely together in their respective groupings, and when we're back we're going to move on to how to calculate your kerf. So I'm going to cut away to that right now so that you can actually follow along, cut your felt, and calculate how much kerf you need for the next step. So meet me right back here after you've done that.
Now's a good time to explain to you how to figure out what your kerf is. So you're going to take your felt and you're going to cut a 1-inch square. Now we're going to take it out of the machine and we have to measure it with our calipers.
We're just going to get the calipers going, set it to 0. We're going to measure what we have left from our 1-inch square. You don't want to squish it. You just want to have it fairly snug. So it's a bit tricky with felt. I feel like that's a good measurement, 0.988. So our next step is to get out the calculator, and let's just get this going. So we're going to punch in our 0.988. We're going to subtract the original 1 inch that we started with, and let's see what that gives us. That's 0.012. Then we're going to divide that in 2 because every time you cut something, there's both sides of the line. So you want to give some equal kerf to each side of your piece. So let's divide that by 2, and that equals 0.006. So that's going to be our kerf that we add back into the pieces that we are designing. Now that all our pieces are stacked, it's ready to apply the kerf, and that's a 2-step process. So we're going to select everything on the board. We're going to come over here to the stroke, and we're going to give it a black stroke. Let's just zoom in and see. And there's our black stroke. Now we're going to come up here to Object, Path, Offset Path, and in this box here we're going to enter the number that represents the kerf that we calculated in the last step. So for me that's 0.006. I'll OK that, and before I click away I'm going to change the color of the stroke to something different. So let's come back here to the panel and let's give it a yellow stroke. Now if I zoom in, I have to zoom in really close for you to see this. You'll see we've got 2 overlapping strokes here. The kerf stroke, which is the outer one, the larger one, and the black one that we did originally. So if I click on the black path and delete it, that leaves me with my yellow kerf piece, which is exactly what we want. But let me just back out of that for a sec. There's a quick way to do this so that you can delete all the pieces at once. We're going to come up to Select once again, Same, but this time instead of Fill Color, we're going to choose Stroke Color. That'll choose everything that's a black stroke, and we can just hit our Delete key, and there you go. You're left with your larger kerf pieces. Let's just zoom in to make sure. Yep, we've got our yellow stroke there, we're good to go. Now, for my particular laser, I use black to delineate cut. So we're going to give this a black stroke once again. And now the laser is going to know to cut because we've got a black stroke. However, we're going to lose our colors when we bring it into my Xtool XCS software. So in order to know what color of felt I'm going to cut each grouping in, we're going to have to take our text tool, and I'm just going to write this right in. So
Let's make this blue. I'm going to make that bigger so I can see it. I'll just copy this. Now, of course, we're not going to cut these words. They're just there so that we know what colors of felt we're going to be cutting on. Okay, now that we have our colors identified here, we're going to click on all of these, and we have to come up to Type and Create Outlines. That's going to expand the text so that the Xtool software can read it. If you don't do that, they're going to disappear just like the colors. So do be sure to expand the text before saving it. Our last step is to save this as an SVG. So let's just zoom out and make sure that's the only thing we've got there. I should have mentioned earlier that when I broke apart these pieces, I took it into a new file. So that's one step I forgot to mention. As you can see here, I still have my source file. And this can be as messy as you like. It's your source. You can do whatever you want with that, but you can't save an SVG from here. So you do have to open up a new file in order to do that. So let's hit File, Save As. We'll select SVG. So let's go ahead and name this. Go ahead and save that. And then you'll get this option panel pop up. And I've got all of these already delineated, so I'm just going to save it. I'm using SVG 1.1, decimal place is 4, everything else stays the same. OK that. And now we've got our final SVG. So our next step is to actually cut this on the Xtool P2 CO2 laser. So let's go down to the studio and do that. Here we are in Xtool Creative Space, and we're going to import our file. Click on the File folder image here, Import Image, and open the SVG. As you can see, because we created the SVG to fit our laser bed, it imports in the size that we want it. So here's the benefit in typing in and expanding our text here. You can see what color each grouping is supposed to be so that you can cut it. Let's hold down Control and swipe on the mouse to minimize it so I can see what I'm doing. Now let's select one of these elements. Then I'm going to come up and group it. And now we can move it right off the canvas to the side. Then I'll go ahead and do the same thing by grouping just the elements we'll be cutting, not including the text, and then moving them off the canvas. So I'll organize all of this and then drag them off one by one. Now there's one thing I like to mention, and that is, along with grouping, it's a good idea to choose Combine and Unite in the upper tool panel to further group these elements, because that will cut down on processing time. If you have a lot of pieces and you don't unite them, the laser might cut them out of order instead of methodically moving through the elements from top to bottom. One word of warning regarding uniting elements is that you can't undo that function. So be sure that you've got it grouped the way you want it and that you've got enough felt to position it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to ungroup and rearrange the pieces on the felt. So let's move on to cutting felt and getting it into the machine before we connect our device. Use a rotary cutter to cut the felt to size. And this is great. It's a safety cutter. It doesn't engage until you press it down. So I'm just going to roll along. I've used felt in a variety of projects, so I'm cutting up a rainbow of colors here, but cut whatever colors you're using for this particular project. Another tip is to cut it no bigger than the size of your laser bed so you can fit it in, and be sure that you make room that you can add clips to hold it down. I've positioned my camera at such an angle that you can see that when you cut the felt off the roll, it does tend to curl. So that's where these clips, these magnetic clips, really come in handy. They just fit right into the holes and they just press right down. That way when you come to cut it, it'll be nice and flat on the honeycomb panel. Let's connect the device. I'm going to turn my P2 on and we'll hit connect. There we go. Now I can see that we're going to have to move a few of these things. So first of all,
Let's refresh the screen.
This is one reason not to combine these pieces too soon until you've had a chance to position them on the felt. So I had to go back and re-import my SVG, just so that I could break them apart and reposition them in a way that works for this piece of felt. After re-importing the SVG again, you can see when I drag it onto the felt, it's way too big, so I'm going to split them apart and position them so that I can make the most out of my felt.
Let's drag the white on, we'll group that together. Let's drag the rest up here. And we'll drag that one down there.
Now we can go ahead and group and then unite these pieces so that we can get it ready to cut. So let's just skip ahead.
Let's capture a close view. And we'll zoom in. I'm holding down the control and swiping on the mouse. I just want to make sure that I'm on here. Same with here. Let's capture a close view up here.
Hold down the control key and swipe on your mouse to zoom in and out as you need. That will help you position the pieces on the felt without wasting too much material.
First of all, let's just give it a cut function. Same with this.
Under setting, I already have a pre-established setting for felt, so I'm choosing that. All lasers are slightly different, so I highly suggest that you run your own test grid to determine what the best settings are for felt for your particular laser. Once you know that, you can save your setting just like I did.
Let's input our thickness, 0.096. Actually, let's do 0.096.
The XES software doesn't allow you to type it in unless you have a 0 in front of the decimal point.
We'll hit process, and let's start.
When the felt is done cutting, there are a few threads that tend to hang on because the laser tends to melt it. The felt is a synthetic, so it's more like a plastic, so it does melt slightly, but as you'll see later, we're just going to pull those threads apart with an X-Acto knife.
So our next color is blue. We're just going to go ahead and refresh the screen. We've already put our blue felt in. We're going to minimize this. We can take this right off the canvas. Our white is already cut, so we can move that right down. Our next color is blue. So let's bring this on. Let's group this together. I want to rotate this.
If you grab the handle like I'm showing here, you'll be able to turn your work and fit it on the felt much better.
Let's just do this. And we'll bring it down here.
Don't forget to combine and unite your pieces. Do as I say, not as I forget.
Let's just capture a close view. I'm holding down my control key and I'm just swiping on my mouse. I'm on a Mac here. So let's just make sure that we're on the felt and not too close. Okay. So once again, I'm going to show you this one more time, and then I'm going to cut the rest of the colors off camera because you'll get the gist. So we're going to select everything. We're going to process as a cut function. Then we're going to come into our settings, and I've already preset my felt here. So my settings are preset. I'm just going to click on that. If I click off, I just want to make sure the thickness is still showing. I'm going to hit process. And I'm going to hit start. Now, before I press go on the X tool, I am going to make sure that the inline fan is going. I forgot to do that last time, so let's start this and get the inline fan on, and let's cut.
It always amazes me how well that close view camera works. You can get right up to the edge. I mean, I could have gotten closer than I did here, but it's just amazing, and it always impresses me.
Since this particular felt is synthetic, it can tend to melt together. It does typically pull apart fairly easily, but if there are any threads that are holding on, you can just take a sharp X-Acto blade and just gently nudge them away. But for the most part, bigger pieces like this do come apart very easily. It's just a little pulling. Once all the pieces are apart, you can assemble, and I've just got a board here that's basically the size of the piece that I'm going to be doing. So this goes in the middle. Eventually I'll be gluing this down, but it's just a matter of assembling first, and then once it's assembled I can glue it to a backer board here. Now that it's assembled, I can start gluing it onto the backer. To assemble, I'm going to be using this Aleene's tacky glue, and I know it's more time consuming, but what I like to do is glue along the edges to give it a little bit more stability. You don't have to do this, you could just glue it right to the surface here, and this is just a piece of thin veneer that I've cut to the same size. So I'm just going to run a bead right along here. Try not to get it onto the surface, and I'll come onto the silicone mat here, and I'm just going to butt them up to each other, and I'll just let that dry. Now typically I'll just weigh down these blocks and let it dry like that just for a few moments, and then I can move on to my next one here. So this one, for instance, I'll add the glue right along. And then my next one here, I'll just butt it up against each other like so. And then when I come in with my next one, I'll just run glue along here and here. So again, I'll just weigh it down for a few moments. I've got some weight, so I'm gonna go grab those. But I'm gonna continue doing this off camera.
And here it is finished. Sit it on a shelf or hang it on a wall. It makes great home decor, no matter how you display it. At Birds of a Feather, we're feathering the nest one project at a time. We not only do laser projects, but we do upcycles, crafts, and more. Thanks for watching. For more unique project ideas, subscribe and follow. We'll leave links down in the description for where you can get some of these products that we used in this video. And don't forget to watch another video.